This list will go over cards with the effect to do one of the following: destroy all of your opponent's spells, traps, monsters, or a combination of the three, just as long as it has a destroy all in its card text and works on your opponent's cards in some way. Now, let's get started. Number 10, Tribe Shocking Virus. As always with these kinds of lists, I start off with the best at number 10 spot, and then they slowly get worse and worse until number 1. Tribe Shocking Virus has the effect to banish a monster from your hand, to destroy all face-up monsters with the same type as that monster. With this card having an uncommon type of Thunder, it's basically safe from destroying itself with its own effect. This card is a nerfed version of the banned card, Tribe Infection Virus, which has the effect to discard a card from your hand to declare any one type of monster, and then destroy all monsters of the field of that same type, which is a really good effect, and not once per turn. Tribe Shocking Virus banishes the card from your hand, which is strictly worse. The monster you banish is the type that is used for the destruction, so you can't declare any type you want, which severely limits its usefulness, and it's once per turn. But not completely useless, as it can be a tech option to play against a mirror match. Not a very good tech option, but that is a potential good use of this card and its effect. Or of course, if you combo it with DNA Surgery to destroy everything. Number 9, That Wacky Magic. This card destroys all of your opponent's monsters under a few conditions. 1, you must banish all spell cards from your graveyard, and then you can destroy monsters your opponent controls with a defense less than the number of spells banished times 300. And since most good cards all have the notion of high attack, low defense, the card going off the defense values of cards isn't half bad. And with the average defense of smaller monsters being around 1,000, you'd only need to banish 4 spell cards to potentially wipe your opponent's board of all level 4 or lower monsters. And with an average defense of 2,000 for higher level cards, you'd only need to banish 7 spell cards to wipe the board of pretty much everything else. And therein lies the problem with the card. It is really hard to get that many spell cards in the graveyard for most decks. This card only works in normal decks as a late game card at best, or in a mill deck that also happens to run a ton of spell cards. And most mill decks are monster heavy, so even that's not very common. It's basically on the bad card list for requiring too much for its destroy all effect. But it's not that bad, so it's at a lower spot on the list when compared to the truly bad cards we'll get to later on in the video. Number 8, Weed Out. By paying 500 life points, you can destroy all level 3 monsters on the field who are in face-up attack position. Now, what makes this card bad is how limited its destroy all effect is. It only works on one level of monster, and not even a popular level of monster. Plus, they need to be in attack position, which just adds an additional layer of restrictions on top of its already weird ones. Now, the reason for its terribleness could be because it's a parody card of Return from the Different Dimension, which is an incredibly good card that's currently banned for its power level. And it's basically the card artwork of that card, only replaced with all level 3 monsters. Konami likes to print bad parody versions of good cards as a joke, like with Cold Feet and Cold Wave. But unlike some of the really bad parody cards, Weed Out isn't half bad, instead of just straight garbage like Cold Feet. Since level 4 is the most common level of monsters, if you play level reducers like Stygia and Dirge, you could easily use Weed Out more effectively, as a spell speed 2 full board wipe is still pretty good. Plus, it can be used as a counter to popular level 3 focus decks, like BA or something. Number 7, Eternal Rest. This card allows you to destroy all monsters who are equipped with equip cards. Now, most decks do not use equip cards, so this card almost exclusively falls into the category of a really niche counter card to certain decks that use equip cards as their main focus, like Noble Knights or Inzectors. And most specific counter cards rarely see play, unless they're really good, like System Down, and even then only as side deck options. What's funny about Eternal Rest is that it's a super rare in Duel Links. In Duel Links, they only put cards as super rare or ultra rare if they think the card is really good, or if the card was used in the anime. And Eternal Rest falls into neither of those categories. I think. I don't think it was used in the anime. I could be wrong about that. Also, there is a trap card version of Eternal Rest called Really Eternal Rest, which might be a little better, as it can be used during your opponent's turn to disrupt plays. But not really, both of them aren't that terribly useful. Number 6, Jinzo Lord. This card has the Destroy All effect to destroy all face-up trap cards, which I mean, kind of restrictive, but not the worst effect in the world. Only it's also just like a terrible boss monster. In order to summon it, you need to tribute a Jinzo on the field to special summon this card from your hand. All for 200 more attack, the same effect as Jinzo, plus being able to destroy all face-up trap cards. This card was kind of a joke of a boss monster until many years later when it got some support in the form of Jinzo Ejector, who technically makes summoning Lord and searching it out easier. So really not as bad as it used to be, but still has a really lame boss monster effect that's almost useless. Number 5, Avalon. This card allows you to destroy all cards in the field at the cost of banishing 5 Noble Knight monsters from your graveyard. Which, okay, not so bad I guess for a full board wipe, but 2 of the Noble Knight monsters have to be an Arthur card and a Lancelot card. The 2 main deck Arthur and Lancelot cards are almost never played in standard Noble Knight builds, and the extra deck monsters don't mesh well together either, as 2 of the Arthur cards are Exceeds monsters, and the Lancelot card is a Synchro. Plus, Noble Knights kind of want their monsters to stay in the graveyard and not be banished. But to be fair, their field spell card does help pull off Avalon easier, except the Noble Knight field spell card is also one of the worst field spell cards in the game, and kind of wants the Noble Knights to stay in the graveyard as well. Avalon just requires a little bit too much from its archetype, and goes against what it tries to do, which makes it on the list for basically its requirements alone being too much. Something you'll see with a couple of the other cards later on in this list. Number 4, Elemental Hero Chaos Neos. This card has a gamble effect that maybe will let you destroy all monsters your opponent controls. But unlike other gamble cards that didn't make this list, Chaos Neos is also a contact fusion only monster that requires 3 specific monsters and who returns to the extra deck at the end of the turn. Although, there was a whole lot of new Neospatian support recently that makes this card easier to bring out. But I kind of started writing the script before they announced the new support, and it's not technically out yet, so I'm just gonna kind of leave it at that and talk about its actual effect. You can toss a coin 3 times, and depending on the number of heads, you get one of the following 3 effects. 3 heads lets you destroy all of your opponent's monsters. 2 heads lets you negate all of your opponent's monster effects for the turn. And 1 heads is a negative effect and returns all monsters you control to your hand. Again, the fact that this gamble effect is tied to a fusion monster that is not easy to bring out, returns to your extra deck at the end of the turn, and even has a negative effect if you're unlucky, just makes it a pretty bad card. Number 3, Megaton Magical Cannon. This card falls into the category of really hard to pull off cost for its effect. With this card, you can remove 10 spell counters from anywhere on your side of the field in order to destroy all cards on your opponent's side of the field. This card was obviously made for spell counter decks, and how easily can spell counter decks use this card? Well, it really depends heavily on the deck, but in most cases, those kinds of decks don't last long enough where they will have 10 spell counters out to pull off this card's effect. In a more casual setting though, decks that play cards like Magical Citadel can pull off some very high numbers of spell counters. It's just part of the problem with cards that use any kind of counters in general is that it's so easy to just remove them from the field. So nothing really stays around long enough to get high numbers. So generally, not really viable. The only actual play Megaton Cannon saw was in Diamond Dude decks, as Diamond Dude could actually use the card's effect without having to pay its cost, giving a quick and easy board wipe at the small cost of playing a dead card that you had to top deck. Number 2, Elemental Burst. This card can destroy all cards on your opponent's side of the field, at the cost of tributing 4 monsters with the attributes of Wind, Water, Fire, and Earth. While its board wipe is good, it falls into the category of requiring way too much for its effect. Tributing 4 monsters is in itself a tough cost for a card, but also requiring to be 4 different attributes is a much taller order. Of course, it can be done in some decks, like 6 samurais who can swarm the field easily and all have different attributes, but it's not really worth it. There is a much better card that kind of fits the Elemental Burst theme, called FUH-RIN-KA-ZAN, which just simply requires there to be the 4 types of monsters on the field in order to activate one of its 4 amazing effects, which can be completely fulfilled with Elemental Mistress Doriado. Something Elemental Burst cannot, as it does require 4 tributes, and can't just tribute one monster treated as all 4 types listed in its card text. And now for number 1, Final Destiny. This card requires you to discard 5 cards from your hand to destroy all cards in the field. Not just your opponent's, but it gets rid of everything. Ditching 5 cards for a full 2-way board wipe is too much, as there's no real way to take advantage of that game state. You'd need to destroy at least 6 cards on your opponent's side of the field to break even in card advantage. But not the steepest cost though. I think Elemental Burst probably has the worst cost of all the cards on this list, except at least that card only nukes your opponent's field. If Final Destiny only worked on your opponent, it might be a little less bad actually. Not to say there are no decks that can't benefit from Final Destiny. Dangers and Fables both can gain their effects from the discard cost of Final Destiny. There are some decks that can basically play from the graveyard anyway, so having nothing on field and dumping their hand wouldn't be the end of the world. But even in those situations, there are better cards that don't require 5 cards to discard for their effect. Even decks that want to discard their hands don't want to discard 5 cards for any effect unless it wins them the game. Because here's the thing about those kinds of decks. They usually have other ways of destroying monsters, and usually have pretty small hands anyway. So drawing a Final Destiny outside of the opening hand is almost always a dead draw, since they won't have 5 cards to discard anyway, which I think makes Final Destiny the worst destroy all card. And that's it for the list. I'm generally not a fan of honorable mentions, but there were a ton of other bad destroy all cards that didn't make the list for one reason or another. So if you think I missed something really good, I'd love to know why you think it's worse than the options on the list. And if you have ideas for videos similar to this one, I'd love to hear them as well. I have made quite a few videos based on suggestions from the comment section.